Hi, I'm Aranya, and in this video I'm going to talk a bit about the beads that we find on some of the tools. And Slim was very fascinated by the work of people like Nikola Tesla with his experiments, and the purpose for him of adding beads, for instance, to a ring. So this is a half cubit, half sacred cubit, gold-plated ring. So the plain Jane rings don't have any beads. They're plain. The plain copper rings, as they get to 1.5 cubit, they do start to get beads on them. The purpose of the beads, from Slim's perspective, was very much about adding some extra oomph, some horsepower to the ring. Tesla used spherical capacitors, as he called them, to enhance the strength of the field. So the thinner the wire, the weaker the current that travels around the wire, and so the more effective it is to put some beads on. And originally Slim made all of these beads himself, hammered them out. So that must have been one heck of a job. So the smaller gold-plated, silver-plated rings will have beads on. So that's a lost cubit with beads, and the beads move. We'll get to that in a moment. The harmonizers also have beads. You'll see even the personal harmonizers have little beads on them, but they don't move on the harmonizers. They don't move. And the beads on the acu-vac coil, so you can probably see it from the end there. There's a bead in there on the wire that goes through the center, and that indicates the end that pulls, if you like. So the energy comes in from the end where there's no bead. So if I'm working on an area of the body that needs some healing, then the bead is pointed away from the body. And actually the process of using the coil, the full process, would involve moving further away from the body and then turning it around and bringing it back in again. But the bead should be away from the body when working to begin with on areas that need cleaning. And Slim talked about these like they were a vacuum cleaner for pain. My experience of them is very interesting. Having had a dental abscess at one point, I was using it and I could feel the pressure, the pulling, which is kind of weird. For something it's just a bunch of wire, but I can't totally explain how these things work as somebody who did physics, but they definitely, I can feel that definitely does things. So in terms of the beads move around, and they could have been fixed onto the ring, but Slim also felt that when you move the beads around, for instance, so you might like the sort of the balance of the 120-degree angles, for instance, like this. But we can move them around, and every time we move them, we create a different length piece of wire. So these operate at a very basic level. What the ring does is it resonates, just like any aerial. An aerial is made to be a particular wavelength. And you've got transmitting aerials and receiving aerials. This is not a transmitting it. Well, as I understand it, it's not a transmitting aerial, but it is a receiving aerial. And in the sense, what happens is, like the Schumann resonances that we see on the Earth and experience. So you've probably heard of Schumann resonances. The fundamental, the lowest frequency, 7.83 hertz, and you have these harmonics that go up from there. And they're just a standing wave that relates to the circumference of the Earth, which of course varies slightly depending on which direction you go, because the Earth bulges more at the equator. But as lightning storms go off around the world, you have a lot of EMFs are generated in those natural phenomena, and they travel out in all directions across the surface of the Earth, and when they come back, having gone all the way around, inside the ionospheric cavity, so the ionosphere, which is 30 miles or so above our heads and up quite a long way, is highly ionized. So it's called the ionosphere because cosmic rays in particular come in from space and they hit molecules and they split them, so you have lots of positive and negative charges moving around, and electricity can flow very readily there. And so Schumann resonance is the result of these waves coming from lightning strikes, going out across the earth, coming back, and where the frequencies where the peaks overlay the peaks before, a little bit like pushing somebody on a swing. If you push them and then push them again at the precise time, that amplitude of that swing gets bigger. And if you push them at the wrong time, they don't get going. And so you have this thing called constructive and destructive interference, which means that certain frequencies are amplified because they overlay each other perfectly and amplify themselves, and most of the others disappear because they just cancel each other out. The peaks cancel out the troughs and so on. So these being specific lengths, qubit lengths or half qubit lengths, these amplify certain frequencies, and those frequencies, because this is made of copper, silver and gold plating is also very electrically conductive, and so these amplify certain frequencies, and when we're physically in electrical contact with them, like we're holding them, that electricity, those frequencies can pass into our body, and that seems to be where the benefit comes from. So we have the whole circumference can be a harmonic, but also if we move the beads around, we create places where the wire can reflect back on itself, and so you create all these extra harmonics. I would say don't worry about calculating that, just feel into it, like all things to do with the tools, including choosing which ones. I would say just go with your intuition. It's much more knowledgeable about such things than your brain, or your logical mind, I should say, because it's all part of that. So the beads can be moved around to wherever you like. Some rings have more beads than others. They're there to amplify the strength of the field that the ring generates. On harmonizers, they stay where they're put, and when it comes to acu-vac coils, they indicate the outflow, so it pulls in here and it comes out at the end where the bead is, and that's what the beads are all about.